Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about the modern team sites, which is a new feature that was released as of January 2017 of this year. And this is going to be the second part of this feature. So initially with O365 Groups, the first release of modern team sites or introduction, they were just adding modern team sites to existing O365 Groups. But now in this release, they're actually allowing you to create them from the SharePoint home, and that's what we will take a look at. There are 7 main features that you should be aware of the modern team sites. So let's go ahead and walk through. So first one is right here on the SharePoint home. When you do the create site, this is actually going to create a modern team site versus a subsite as it would have before. So initially, before this release, and this is in my first release tenant as of January 2017, so depending on when you watch this video, it may be GA, so it may be on the standard release. But initially, you were creating a subsite under a designated site collection, and by default, that was going to be the root site collection or the default site collection. As of right now, with the modern team sites, I can come in here and put in the title and the name, a description, and what it's going to do is generate a O365 group site collection, which is the base of a modern team site. So let me just go here, Deshaun Team Test. Okay, I'm trying to find a name that I didn't use before. And as you can see, this is the URL. It's a site collection, and it's going to be under the Teams Manage Path. Now, your SharePoint administrator will be able to modify and specify which managed path to use for these new site collections. And as of right now, there's still only 2. There's going to be Teams or Sites managed paths to choose from. Now we can have the privacy setting. This could be public or a private group. And basically, if it's public, it's going to be available to anyone within the organization. There's another step if you want to, well, let me come back to that. For existing O365 group sites, there is an additional step if you want to extend this out to the external users, and I think that was released November 2016 timeframe. So here you can give a description. And then you can go ahead and create the site. Pretty standard to standard sites, right? I mean, we're used to putting in titles and descriptions, but there's privacy. We were originally managing that through SharePoint Groups, but because this is an O365 group, the security, user access is managed through Active Directory groups. So now I can specify an additional site owner. And again, this is just allowing them to be a backup. Now, you will notice that the terminology here, additional owner, this is going to be the owner of the group or the site collection admin of this created admin if you were looking at in a security model of the legacy sites. And then the members will be the contributors group compared to the legacy sites. But here, we're just dealing with an AD group. So the AD group, this is going to be the owner of the group. And I think behind the scenes, they're actually populating this in 2 SharePoint groups, though those groups are be hidden out. But I will show you those options a little bit later. But now we can add in members, and this is going to be not owners, but members as in contributors. And the visitor access was that previous screen where we selected public or private, and that was an all or nothing as far as external, everyone access except for external users. So here, let me just specify Deshaun2 as the additional owner. Click Finish, and now my site is created. So actually, we kind of went through that process a little bit pretty quickly, but actually as I was creating the site and before I added the additional owner, you can see, if you kind of rewind the video, you can see there was a spinner, then the spinner stopped and it says site was created. These site collections are created probably within 10 seconds compared to the legacy sites. They take a lot longer than that, usually 1 or 2 minutes if you were creating a legacy site collection. Okay, so here, this is, if you're familiar with the modern team or modern pages, this is a modern page. This has the new web part ecosystem and the authoring publishing system to where there is no web part gallery, but rather these control panel where your client-side web parts are here. You will also notice that this is going to be a subset of the web parts that you're used to on the legacy site, as far as like search, content by search web part, content editor web part, script editor web part. Those guys are not going to exist as of today in this pane. And this list is forever growing. If you are a developer and you're creating the client-side web parts using the SharePoint framework, development framework, your web parts will again appear in this box once you activate that add-in. So outside of that, I mean, pretty much everything is going to, from a user perspective, though the DNA of these sites are completely different and rewritten from the ground up compared to the legacy sites. If you're already into the modern site, your end users are going to be somewhat familiar. I mean, they're going to need all this additional training, maybe for the nuances and the hidden features, but for the most part, they should be able to be dropped into this environment and kind of find their way or figure their way around. Now, as far as managing the site from a site owner or a site collection admin perspective, you still have the gear icon, but you don't see the site settings option. And they kind of remove that and replace it with the site info option. And here you can do the renaming of the site. You can change the description. You can change your privacy setting if you want to go from public to private, private to public. And then also you can click on this view all settings. And this is going to take us to the familiar site settings page. Now, this site settings page is going to be a little bit different than what we're used to. You're going to see most of the options that we're kind of adhere to or used to and seeing in the legacy site, but there are some critical pieces that are missing. One, you see the permissions and group where you actually manage SharePoint groups and where you drop on users in or out of SharePoint groups. That's totally hidden because this is an O365 group site. All that is going to be managed via the Active Directory behind the scenes. But as a site owner, if you were trying to manage the site and add in new members, for example, then you would just go to members here. Oh, it looks like it's trying to pop me over to Outlook. But really, you just go to the members section, and then you would just add and modify those members as if you would with a standard O365 group. Another thing to be aware of, and this is feature number 2, is that when you look at, as a SharePoint admin, you go into the admin console and you go to the SharePoint admin module, you will notice that those O365 groups, and you're kind of aware of this already, they do not appear in this site collection list, which makes things a little bit interesting because because now your users, especially now that these O365 groups are part of the self-service site creation on the SharePoint home, it's going to be interesting from a SharePoint admin perspective, how are you going to manage those groups? So if someone leaves the organization, for example, and your backup, they have a backup, but say, for example, the backup and the owner is removed, how would the SharePoint admin get access and manage that site? So it's pretty interesting that it's not here. Another thing to be aware of, and we kind of talked about this when we created the site, if you go under the settings section under the SharePoint admin and then scroll down to the site creation area, this is where you can pretty much turn on certain features and items on how these O365 groups are created. So here you can specify only allow them to create O365 groups, even though it seems like only site SharePoint admins, that's another thing to be aware of, only SharePoint admins at this point will be able to create classic site collections, which I think that was always true, right? Because even when they were doing the create site from the SharePoint home, they were just creating, they as in users and users within the organization, creating subsites under a designated site collection. And back in the day, this is where you would specify which site collection that would be created in. But as of now, with this new modern team site release, the only thing that you can specify, because these are site collections now, is which managed path to dump those site collections in, and then also if you want to enforce a secondary contact or not. Now, this use the form at this URL. This is going to be interesting. I think they're still working on this, but I saw a demo on how this works in one of the Ignite videos. And this is where, say for example, you have your users going through that create site process. You could give Microsoft is going to drop in a see other options. And when they click on that link, it's going to take them to the form that you specify, and you can customize. And this is where you can allow them to create other site collections based on predefined templates. And as this matures, what they're planning on doing is allowing you to create these sites, save them off as a template, and then during this process, this URL here, it will provide them a link to a page to where your end users would then have an option to create different sites based on existing templates, out of the box templates, or custom templates. But all of that process is going to be custom. The good news is that the PMP, the Microsoft SharePoint Pattern and Practice organization, has actually created most of that work, or a great baseline of that work, for us developers and SharePoint architects to kind of build on and make it custom or make it user-friendly for the client or the organization at hand. Okay, so that's it for the SharePoint admin. So just be aware of these groups are not going to appear in this admin list. And if you have to do a few other additional settings on how these modern site collections are created, you just dump into the settings section here. Now, we talked about the Ultra 65 groups and how that's going to be different. So let's kind of jump into here. So I'll go back into my Deshaun team test and then site information. And as we saw before, that whole section is missing. Now, what's very interesting with the way this is set up initially, and I'm sure Microsoft is going to continue to add to this, is that you are able to create subsites. So you are able to come into this group, go into site contents, where you go and create additional lists and libraries and pages and that if you're dealing with the modern site. But here you can actually go into subsite, create new, but your subsite options revert back to the classic sites, which is very interesting. And one thing to be aware of, there's no way to create a modern team site as a subsite as of today. So let's go here. Let's do classic team. Let's call this guy classic team. And this is going to be a subsite. And then I'm going to just select the classic team site template. I'm going to add this to the navigation, and then I'm going to click create. Now, I purposely did not break inheritance because I want to show you what's actually kind of happening in the background. As a SharePoint developer or SharePoint architect, you're kind of familiar with how the ecosystem or the security system is set up for these sites. So now, as I'm in here as a subsite, I can click on the gear icon, site settings, now back to my classic menu and classic options, go into site settings. Now I can see the user and permissions group for the subsite. And if I click on peoples and group, which is going to show me the groups. So as you can see in these groups here, we were given the same 3 user groups that we are accustomed to with the legacy sites. But you can tell behind the scenes when we created that modern site group, the modern team site, the AD group that was created, because for every modern team site, which is an Ultra 65 group site, there's an AD group created to represent that site. And then you have in that AD group, the group itself was dumped into the SharePoint members group, and everyone except external users. So if you're going to open this up to public privacy setting, everyone is dumped into the SharePoint members group versus the SharePoint visitors group. So I misspoke before. So now taking a closer look at that, you can tell that it seems like this visitors group is not even used. So if you open this up to other users in the organization where it's public, they're going to give the same access. They're given the same access to the members that you specify. So there's just one thing to be aware of, like what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so we talked about creating subsites. We talked about the security groups and the nuances there and how these Ultra365 group sites do not appear in the SharePoint admin group. So now the question is, if I go back, let me go back to my SharePoint home. Let me click on the Deshaun team test. This is the modern team site that I created. And if I wanted to remove this, say for example, I created this by accident, and if I want to remove it, if I go to site action, this is one of the things that I find interesting. And I know this is probably still in beta, right? It's first release, so you know they're still kind of playing around with it and adding features. But I don't have an option to delete this site. As in, if this was a classic site collection, I would have an option to delete it here. Now, understand that this is Ultra365 group site. We know that in Ultra365 groups, I can go to Mail, which is my Outlook, and then go to Deshaun Team Test, which is where this guy is created, right? So when I create Ultra365 modern site, it's created under the group section here. You can click on this ellipse and then click on View Details. No, sorry. You can click on, oh no, this option is not here. Or more, nope, this option is not here. What I'm looking for is the edit option. So let me go into Ultra365 group, edit group option. And then here you have the option to delete the group. But for the group site, the modern team site, if I click on that guy, click on the ellipse, I'm not given the edit group option. And I did not, yeah, so I'm getting the edit group option here. So the new Deshaun Sample 1 group. Okay, so maybe it's just taking the time to load up because, sorry, because I did not keep a good job with tracking these guys. So the OG group, this right here was created as a Ultra365 group site from within Outlook. Test Modern Team site, I believe this was created as a modern team site. Just looking at the date on the SharePoint home. Yes, so this is an edit group option. So maybe just because I created this guy pretty recently, it's still probably loading or being hydrated in the background. So the edit group option is not there. But if I wanted to delete this Deshaun Sample 1, click on the ellipse, edit group, go down to delete group, check this option that says I understand everything's going to be permanently deleted, and then click delete. That gets rid of my group. So that's one way to delete it. So just to be aware of that, even though these are modern team sites and you go through the process of creating them as you would a SharePoint site, once you get into the details of managing membership, deleting it, or anything along those lines, you kind of have to revert back to the Ultra365 group way of handling group sites versus under the gear icon site collections and managing it that way. So that's just one thing to be aware of. Pretty interesting. So the other thing that's interesting, to manage the membership. So let's go back to the SharePoint home. And I'm going to click on Deshaun test site. So this is the team test that we created. And now what I want to do is walk through the process of adding in an external member. So if I click on members, it drops me in here to Outlook. And I know some of these settings are available and some are not. For newer sites, it just takes a while for all the options to kick in. And now I can go into add members. And then once I add members, I can type in a email address, someone outside of the Active Directory organization, and then invite them in as a guest. Now, understand that when you invite guests in, they're going to be giving the members access, which in the SharePoint group analogy is going to be the members, the contributors group. Okay, so they will be able to edit and do other things as other members of the group. So now, once I have this added here, click Save. But this is how you can add external users to your O365 group. Okay, so that's it for now. That's modern team sites. So just one of those things to be aware of that, you know, is in the first release tenant. Is something new that, you know, we can play around with. It definitely does not seem like it's ready for GA, but it's definitely usable in the state that it's in now. I think just understanding behind the scenes, and this is where your organization users or end users may be a little confused, because as a SharePoint developer or, you know, admin or architect, we understand the inner workings and we can kind of decode or reverse engineer how this is put together. From an end user perspective, it may be a lot of confusion, that especially with the path that they take to create it, understanding that, okay, in the background, this is really an O365 group. So for membership access, removing it, and, you know, privacy settings, what that means, is going to take the 365 group route. But for managing libraries and all this other good stuff, that's going to take the SharePoint route. But either way, I just wanted to highlight those 7 items about modern team sites, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, take care.